Good morning, sunshine. Welcome back to Tiger's Occult. I'm your paranormal researcher and investigator, Dr. Morris, and today's entity is the Basque Bull, the Aatxe. Going off our three main reference texts, Elias's Encyclopedia of Spirits, Bain's Encyclopedia of Spirits and Ghosts in World Mythology, and Goyle's Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, and a smattering of further research, I'm going to tell you where it comes from, how to identify it, what it does, we'll address any ethical concerns, and then we'll go over safe interaction with the entity if you should ever come across it during your travels. According to Bain's and Illy's encyclopedias, this cave spirit comes from the Basque area in southwest Europe. Now, the Basques didn't exactly survive Christianity's arrival between the 4th and 12th centuries AD, so records of their mythology is extraordinarily spotty. The Christians of the time didn't exactly have the greatest track record of preserving pagan cultures. Most of our information about the Basque people comes from Strabo, a 1st century Greek geographer, philosopher, and historian, Arab authors from the 8th century during the Umayyad conquest of Spain, various sources of the Catholic Inquisition who didn't exactly record pagan religious information with the best of intentions, and various 19th and 20th century collections, mostly from Father Jose Miguel Barandarian, a Catholic priest who was fascinated by his people's history. Through these records, incomplete as they are, we can start to piece together who and what these mythological entities are. Physical identification methods. Because most of the records of the Aatxe were destroyed, visual documentation doesn't seem to exist anymore. No cave paintings, no contemporary art, no genuine illustrations seem to have survived. Therefore, it is virtually impossible to show you a legitimate depiction of this entity. Furthermore, as this particular entity is known to be a shapeshifter, not only is it exceedingly difficult to show an image of this entity, it's also very difficult to rate on the usual CDI system. One of its most widely known forms is that of a bright red bull, which would make it a Class 6 animalistic anchored genius due to the fact that it is an animal entity and closely related to the Gros de Cerise in France. Keep in mind we're using the term genius here in the classical Latin context, where the entity in question is more similar to a Greek daemon. These entities aren't necessarily good or evil in the same way we understand modern Judeo-Christian demons to be evil as a whole, but rather morally ambiguous. We'll delve a little bit deeper into the ethical concerns later on, but for now, let's get back on track with proper identification information. The bull is nearly always depicted as a large, muscular, powerfully built entity with sharp horns and glowing red eyes. Now, that being said, while its primary form is a bull, it can shapeshift into the form of a man, but that man was never truly human. This leads me to identify the man form as a Class 5 corporeal anchored genius. Information on the physical description of the man is incredibly sparse outside of being red, and his eyes are described as glowing like embers or coal, leading us to believe that either he rarely shifts form or he uses a different form every time. Either way, that's something to watch out for. Oftentimes, those we think are just a normal person like you and me aren't human at all. One of the most defining features of the Aatxe is its voice. Said to be deep and booming, it can be heard from great distances. He's also highly intelligent and cunning, so you'd best be on your toes if you should meet with him. Now we're going to get into folklore, tales, and legends. Gaili and Illies, as well as most of the folklore surrounding the Aatxe, indicate that the Aatxe tends to gravitate towards the pre-Christian goddess Mari, also known as Mari Uraka, and Botoko Mari, the Lady of Amboto, and Murumindiko Dama, the Lady of Muramindi. I'm certain we'll have a dive into Mari later, so we're not going to get too sidetracked here. Instead, directing our attention back to the Aatxe, we'll learn that he has the power to create storms at night. He frequently does this in the belief that good people will seek shelter from the elements, while only criminals and those with bad intentions will wander about in such terrible weather. He seems to be an enforcer of sorts, preying on such criminals. Other tales indicate that the Aatxe is something of a guardian spirit with absolutely no tolerance of disrespect for the earth, spirits, or any sacred rituals. Now, the ethical concerns here, there's a significant number. A reminder to all, just because a being or entity is paranormal or supernatural in nature, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're automatically evil and need to be hunted down. There's even some evidence to indicate that just because a supernatural entity is part of a specific group, that also doesn't define their behavior and doesn't necessarily warrant their destruction. So, our friend here, the Aatxe, is a guardian spirit who deliberately preys on criminals, robbers, and other ne'er-do-wells. He demands manners, bravery, honesty, and decency. If you're on his bad side, perhaps you'd better look at your own life, Safe interaction protocols. Between the Aatse's innate size, strength, and intelligence, I would advise caution if you intend to directly engage him. However, due to the ethical concerns raised earlier and the Aatse's general behavior, we're not inclined to believe that such a direct confrontation would be necessary. Instead, we here at Tigers Occult Books and Research believe that the most positive method of interacting with this entity would be a combination of deterrence and appeasement. Be polite, be professional, be brave and honest, and do not lie or try to cheat him. So, be a good person, and you'll never have to worry about encountering the Aatse. Anyway, that's about all the information I was able to dig up on about this mainly inoffensive entity. I hope you found it informative. As always, like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Till next time, fellas, I'll see you down here at the lab. Good morning, sunshine. Welcome back to Tigers Occult. I'm your paranormal researcher and investigator, Dr. Morris, and today's entity is the Abassy. Plural of that is Abisalar. I don't know how that works, but here we are. While Illies and Guiley are quiet on the matter, Bain's Encyclopedia gives us a brief rundown of the entity as well as its aliases. Abassy with an I, Abassy with one A, and Chubeldi. Fortunately, Bain's work is always excellent as far as citation is concerned, and it gives us another place to pull from, namely Coulter's Encyclopedia of Ancient Deities, as well as Meletinsky's Poetics of Myth. With these as a starting point, we can go ahead and conduct our own further research and figure out exactly what we're looking at here. I'm going to tell you where it comes from, how to identify it, what it does, and we'll address any ethical concerns. Then we'll make sure we go over safe interaction with the entity if you should ever come across it during your travels. Let's start with the origins of this entity. Most references to this entity are Russian or Bulgarian in nature. It seems to come from the Yakut people, who were a Turkic group native to northern Siberia in what is modern day the Republic of Sakha. Here's where all that gets a bit fuzzy for me. I know next to nothing about internal Russian geography and care even less about the politics. Either way, from what I can tell, the Yakut seem to have been somewhat insulated from Christian destruction of pagan histories up until the Russian conquests in the 17th century when the Orthodox Church began influencing the region. The Soviet Union likewise attempted to put an end to Yakut shamanism and all local practices, but Yakut shamanism actually survived due to the lack of written record keeping. Instead, mythology seemed to have been pushed down through the ages by means of storytelling, specifically in the Alanko, or the heroic epics. Likewise, there seems to be a lack of illustration regarding the Abassy, meaning I have little to show you beyond perhaps clumsy shadow puppets. I think I'll spare you that imagery. In Yakut, the Alanka Hut is the person who actually performs the saga, so these stories were passed from Alanka Hut to Alanko Hut. That being said, the understanding of the Abassy is so universal to the Sakha culture, they use a reference to the Abassy in order to express hatred or disgust for something. The term, roughly translated, means to see Abassy. I'm not going to attempt to say the original term, mainly because I can't read Russian or Cyrillic, but also because I certainly cannot pronounce it either. Anyway, let's get into the physical identification methods. Description of the Abassy comes from Hatto's essays on medieval German and other poetry on page 128 and is as follows. The one-eyed, one-legged, sometimes with two-headed, eight-legged, two-tailed steeds. The Alanko indicates that the Abisalar are physically grotesque, terrible, man-eating beings, with the chief Alep Kahara at Mungadun being a three-headed, six-armed, six-legged giant with a body made of iron. I suppose that's distinctive enough for our purposes. Going by the standard CDI system, because these entities are allegedly long-dead spirits that would classify them as a Class 3 because they don't seem to remember their previous human identity. Because they seem to stick to certain locales and they don't stray, I'd describe them as a focused entity, maybe anchored. And due to the fact that they seem to be made of iron, yet are formerly human spirits, I'd identify them as a corporeal reanimator. Put it together, and the Abassy is a Class 3 focused, anchored, corporeal reanimator. Now we'll get into the folklore, tales, and legends. To really understand these entities and their role in folklore, we'll have to take a brief crash course in Yakut shamanism. Yakut shamanism interprets existence as having upper and lower layers, while our plane of existence, Earth, is somewhat sandwiched in between the two. These Abassy are said to exist in the lower level, which predictably is understood to be the Kingdom of Darkness or the Underworld. As we get into folklore from around the world, I'm sure you'll notice a running directional theme here. So the Abassy are said to be the spirits of long dead who lived near deserted places or graves, who seem to exist with the express purpose of causing destruction and chaos. The Yakutian ruler of the dead, Arsene Duolai, controls the Abassy. Apparently, Abassy can be appeased by blood sacrifices. However, we here at Tigers Occult and Research strongly recommend against any such action. Generally, if some supernatural entity wants blood, do not under any circumstances agree to such things. Our safe interaction protocols mainly recommend avoidance. They're quite unpleasant entities, and if they're all made of iron like their chief, they could prove to be a formidable foe. That being said, if you find yourself in contact with an Abassy, do not give a blood sacrifice. Instead, we theorize that using a harder metal, steel perhaps, may assist in restraining such entities. Use a chain or a cable or something similar. If a fight becomes inevitable and you have no choice but to engage, use extreme caution and thermite. Plenty of thermite. With a burning temperature of over 2,500 degrees Celsius, or 4,500 degrees freedom units, this exceeds the melting point of iron at 1,538 degrees Celsius, or 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. The best policy, however, seems to be avoid graveyards and abandoned or deserted places in the Republic of Sakha. Which, come to think of it, that seems to be pretty good life advice in general. Anyway, that's about all the information I was able to dig up about this particularly unpleasant entity. I hope you found it informative. As always, like and subscribe and share and all that good stuff. Till next time, fellas, I'll see you down here at the lab. Good morning, sunshine. Welcome back to Tigers Occult. I'm your friendly internet paranormal researcher and investigator, Dr. Morris, and today's entities are Abeona and Adeona from pre-Roman Italian mythology. Going off our three main reference books, Illy's Encyclopedia of Spirits, Bain's Encyclopedia of Spirits and Ghosts in World Mythology, and Goelli's Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, and a smattering of further research, I'm going to tell you where it comes from, how to identify it, what it does, we'll address any ethical concerns, then we'll make sure we go over safe interaction with the entity if you should ever come across it during your travels. Illy's and Bain both have entry, but Goelli is surprisingly silent on the matter. Again, Bain's citation work is always pretty solid, so we have a couple more directions we can go in to conduct deeper research. Let's start with the origins first. These entities predate the Roman Empire, so the actual origins begin to get quite fuzzy. My research indicates that the first references, and possibly the origin of Abeona and Adeona, were recorded in, pardon my Latin, Antiquitates Rerum Humanorum et Divinorum, or the Antiquities of Human and Divine Things by Marcus Terentius Varro, but that is considered to be a lost literary work. St. Augustine of Hippo quoted Varro's Antiquities pretty extensively in, again, apologies for my Latin, I've only read it, I've never heard it spoken, De Civitate de Contra Paganos, or On the City of God Against the Pagans, but no complete copy of Antiquities has survived to the current day. Unfortunately, that's where my research hit a pretty final dead end. Physical identification methods. Well, As with the roadblock in the origins, we really don't have much to go on. There's some Roman marble statues that show a rather unremarkable human-looking female, usually showing them with children. With so little information on these entities, I cannot attempt to classify them. Now, the folklore, tales, and legends is actually pretty neat and wholesome. According to legend, they're protector entities. They're usually linked to children first learning to walk, with Abeona protecting children as they start a journey, and Adeona protecting the children as they return from that journey. Children would make offerings of spelt bread and milk, so adults would offer spelt bread and wine. By the way, spelt is an ancient cereal grain. It's a distinct type of wheat. I had to look that one up. There aren't really many ethical considerations at play here. They're protective entities, with Abeona being the spirit of safe departures and journeys, and her sister Adeona being the spirit of safe and speedy returns. I can't imagine having to defend yourself from a protector spirit. Unless, of course, you're doing something to someone under Abeona and Adeona's protection, in which case, you're on your own. I mean, come on. They teach babies to walk and protect travelers. I'm pretty sure there's a 501c3 charity organization for that. Likewise, for safe interaction methods, I wouldn't be too worried about it. Parents would often pray to Abeona and Adeona and express their hopes for their child's future. If you're asking for protection, maybe make an offering of bread and milk or wine if you're an adult. You can actually get spelt bread on Amazon, so even that's not too difficult. What a time to be alive, huh? Anyway, that's about all the information I was able to dig up about these protective entities. I hope you found it informative. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good YouTube stuff. Till next time, fellas, I'll see you down here at the lab. Good morning, sunshine. Welcome back to Tigers Occult. I'm your friendly internet paranormal researcher and investigator, Dr. Morris, and the entity we'll be covering today hails from the Yoruba people of West Africa, the Abiku. Again, referencing our three main reference texts, Illy's Encyclopedia of Spirits, Bain's Encyclopedia of Spirits and Ghosts in World Mythology, and Goyle's Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, and a smattering of further research, I'm going to tell you where it comes from, how to identify it, what it does. We'll address any ethical concerns, and then we'll make sure we go over safe interaction with the entity if you should ever come across it in your travels. Once again, Guiley is silent on the topic, but Illy's and Bain have fairly comprehensive entries, and as always, Bain's citation work gives us a couple further directions to go in with our research. You know, one of these days I'll have to do a review on Bain's, Illy's, and Guiley's works. Anyway, let's get into the origins of this entity. Coming from the Dahomey mythology, Abiku is a Yoruban term that, roughly translated, takes the word abi, which means that which was born, and combines it with Iku, which is death. These depressing entities are children who were predestined to die, usually before the age of 12 years old. There are two distinct variants of this entity, so in order to streamline and clarify things, I'll cover the first and then the second variant in order. Now, when we get into the physical identification methods, there's a couple interesting problems here. As I previously indicated, there's two main types of Abiku. The first is a vicious, almost vampiric in nature, nocturnal spirit. While it can prey on animals and adults, its preferred prey is children. The younger, the better. Vicious, evil critters. Physical identification of the virulently evil Abiku is rather vague. Judica Illes astutely comments, no one wants to get close enough to really get a good look, or alternatively, those who do come close do not survive. Generally considered to be a demon of disease, it's probably a good idea to keep one's distance. Furthermore, we're told these entities have no stomach, and as a consequence of lacking such an organ, are always hungry, hence its predatory nature. It has been known, however, to possess children, using the child's body in an attempt to eat and drink its fill. Using the standard class description identification system, because it's considered demonic in nature, that would give us a class 5, something that's not alive and was probably never even close to human. There's little data on this entity's composition. However, some reference to their anatomy exists. They have no stomach. They are capable of eating children. Its ability to possess children as well contradicts the ordinary corporeal or incorporeal argument. Nevertheless, when we consider the alternate form of the Abiku that I'll be covering in a few moments, it's possible to see how such entities may be corporeal or not depending in their current state. So I'll label it as semi-corporeal. Like the Vrikolas of Greece, it's an entity that needs to constantly feed on flesh to survive. We do know that it is an entity like I said, has no stomach, like a Buddhist preta or a Japanese Gakkai. So I'll label it as a feeder. That gives us a class 5 semi-corporeal flesh-eating feeder. Now, we're going to get into the folklore tales and legends, the Yoruba-speaking peoples of the slave coast of West Africa, a book written by Colonel Alfred Burden Ellis and first published in 1894, tells us there are wide uninhabited tracts of countries with wide number of spirits who suffer from hunger, thirst, and cold. They have no temples for worship, no one offers sacrifices to them, and as such attempt to improve their condition by entering the bodies of newborns. Once inside the newborn, it uses the child's body to gather as much food and drink as possible while readily allowing the child's physical body to waste away while the Abiku steals all of the nourishment. Ethical considerations. There's no two ways about it. These are foul, loathsome creatures. If encountered, it's probably in everyone's best interest that this thing be destroyed on sight. Billy's indicates that there is no propitiation or appeasement possible. By their very nature, they can never be satisfied. You're not going to talk this one down from eating you. Safe interaction methods. If one encounters a child possessed by an Abiku, it may be possible to force entity expulsion by means of causing pain or ringing bells, but this must be done while the possessed child is eating. One may attach iron rings and small bells to the ankle of the possessed child and hang iron chains around the neck. Once the Abiku is successfully banished from the child, there are several methods of further protection. Iron, salt, and amulets forged of iron, copper, and silver can banish the Abiku or repel the Abiku and keep certain rooms protected and barred from entry. The fact that we can use iron, copper, or silver tells me something else. You can certainly use amulets for protection. Me, I prefer shotguns. The shotgun hull is an excellent high-speed payload delivery system. It'll launch just about anything you can stuff into the shell. Something to be aware of, though, if you're putting iron through your steel shotgun barrel, you'll want to use an actual shot cup when loading your cartridge instead of simple wadding to keep the iron and the steel from contacting one another and ruining your barrel. We'll discuss paranormal chemistry and ballistics at a later date. That being said, we're going to move on to the other form of Abiku. The other Abiku is an interesting, childlike, almost playful entity, a soul that flits back and forth between life and death at a whim. It thinks that crossing the threshold from life to death is amusing. It's almost innocent in a way, but they are often too immature to understand the damage they cause to everything associated with crossing back and forth like that. Once the Abiku finds a mother it likes, it will use that mother as a conduit to cross from death to life, only to cross back from life to death at an early age. As you can imagine, this is incredibly painful, physically and emotionally, to the mother and the entire family. In plain words, no beating around the bush, an Abiku is a child who is born to a mother and dies before the age of 12, only to return and be born again to the same mother. And yes, that includes all the pain of having a child and then having a child die at such a young age. The childlike Abiku can be identified if the family begins to have multiple unexplained stillbirths and miscarriages, or if the children of a specific family begin perishing at a young age, usually before 12 years old. The family might begin deliberately scarring the child's body if they begin to suspect an Abiku's involvement, the theory being that the new child should bear a similar mark to the scar they left on the old child's body. These entities, while on this plane of existence, are said to be incredibly gifted psychic mediums. By its nature, the veil between life and death is very thin for them. Indeed, they are liminal beings, somewhere in between being human and spirit. They tend to enjoy the spirit world and would prefer to stay there, yet they are constantly reborn as human. Because this entity seems, for all intents and purposes, to be an actual human soul, I would classify it as a Class 4. The only time it appears on this plane of existence is in its human form, so I'm going to consider it corporeal. As it consistently returns to an individual single mother, I'll identify it as a focused entity, and because it's the same soul in a different body, it's a reincarnator. Put that together, and we've got a Class 4 corporeal focused reincarnator. The folklore tales and legends tell us that Abiku children are sometimes aware of the pain that their constant switching between life and death causes their mother, but they are frequently surrounded by spirits that beckon and call to them to return to the spirit world. This isn't entirely too different from similar stories told of European fae. Interpreting the folklore, I'm not convinced these souls are innately different than human souls. The term Abiku more describes a behavioral pattern. While its sensitivity to the spirit world cannot be changed, it's possible that a loving family may ground this soul to our plane of existence and protect it, keeping it alive longer than an expected Abiku's corporeal lifespan. The Yoruba have developed methods of keeping the Abiku alive, specifically, again, amulets crafted from iron, copper, and silver. There's a handful of reasons to explain why an Abiku haunts a particular family, or why a child just happens to be an Abiku. The most innocent forms of Abiku may be those that meander back and forth between our world and the spirit world, while finding their home in both or neither at the same time. The other reason would be that the Abiku loves both its spirit partners as well as its human family, and they cannot stand being separated from either. While on our plane of existence, it pines for the spirit partners, but when it's in the spirit world, it desperately misses its human family. The other two reasons are much more focused and malevolent. The Abiku itself may be the soul of someone angry at the mother or the family, and punishes both with its repeated cycle of birth and death. Alternately, a sorcerer may have cursed the woman or family with an Abiku, actively punishing the family with the birth death cycle. The last reason is the most immature and truly childlike reason. The Abiku is simply a mischievous child soul that doesn't have the maturity or empathy to understand the suffering that they are causing a family. They're amused by the act of going back and forth between the spirit world and our world, remaining oblivious to a family's pain. Ethical considerations. In polar opposition to the alternate form of Abiku, there's a lot. They're children. That includes every ethical consideration of dealing with a normal human child. As for the safe interaction methods, there's the iron, copper, and silver amulets that may ground the Abiku's soul to our plane of existence. The Abiku's spirit partners that constantly call to the Abiku to join them in the spirit world may actually be appeased by offerings of food. These offerings should be burned, not simply left to decay, at remote forest shrines. Lastly, Abiku who love their spirit partners and human families alike may basically be bribed to stay on this plane of existence. Parents of Abiku children are basically told, give them what they want. Ideally, the Abiku child should be kept so happy that it wants to live out the rest of its natural life in this plane of existence. Anyway, that's all the information I was able to dig up about these fascinating Yoruban entities. As always, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. You can find me on Rumble, BitChute, YouTube, and Odyssey. Till next time, fellas, I'll see you down here at the lab. Good morning, sunshine. Welcome back to Tiger's Occult. I'm your friendly internet paranormal researcher and investigator, Dr. Morris, and today we're going to do something a little bit differently. So far, we've covered entities from West Africa, the Republic of Sakha, the Basque region of north-central Spain and southwestern France, and lastly, the pre-Roman area that makes up modern-day Italy. As you may have noticed in regards to Abeona and Adeona, there was little information available, and most of the information was found in a literary lost work. Lost works are documents, literary work. Even in the modern context, they can be pieces of multimedia that have no surviving copies. They're only known through references or through literary fragments, and as such, referencing these original texts is impossible. Some of these entities coming up are referenced in literary fragments of lost texts, while others are referenced only in oral history traditions, making information gathering and especially visual imagery virtually impossible. This is going to be one of those appendix videos. We're going to be going over entities with too little surviving data to make a full video about them. So hang in there, we're going to bang these out real quick, and if you have a lead on anything I haven't found, please let me know in the comments section down below. One of my personal goals with this project is to be able to uncover more information about these relatively unknown spirits and entities, and if we can find enough data to take one of these short little blurbs and expand it into a comprehensive, coherent, standalone entry, that'd be awesome. So stay tuned, let's get into it. Alrighty, Roo then. Right off the bat on this one, I'm going to have to apologize to my editor if I mispronounce this. Keep in mind, I spent a lot of time reading these books in silence, save for the occasional griping from my boss. Like many people who have only read words and never heard them aloud, I also struggle with pronunciation, especially in ancient foreign languages. As I do not natively speak ancient Egyptian, my pronunciation is liable to be somewhat, let's go with lacking. That being said, first up in this appendix, our first entity is an Egyptian crocodile guardian spirit, the Ab-es-imy-duat. Guile and Illes don't have any mention of it, but Bane tells us it's a monstrous crocodile that guards the 7th hour or section of the Tuat, the underworld. Without an in-depth understanding of the Egyptian afterlife mythology, that doesn't really particularly tell us much, but I'm sure we'll get into that rabbit hole another time. I actually debated doing this entity on its own, as there's so little information on it, and I'm sure it would make far more sense if we did an actual deep dive into the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Anyway, as Ra, the sun god, passes by, Ab-es-imy-duat would say a magical spell that would allow Ra to pass so the god Osiris could rise from the ground under Ab-es-imy-duat and look upon Ra as he passes. With such little data available, I'm extremely hesitant to attempt any classification. Owing to the fact that it's always referred to as a guardian spirit rather than a god like Ra or Osiris, I would hypothesize it's a class 5. Being as it seems to only exist in the Egyptian underworld, I'd say it likely has no corporeal form. Furthermore, due to the nature of its duties, guarding the 7th hour of the underworld, I would say it's anchored to that specific location. Hypothetically, and again with such limited data this is little better than a guess, I would say it's a Class 5 anchored incorporeal guardian. As far as ethical concerns and safe interaction methods, I cannot hope to hazard a guess. Maybe if you find yourself dead and in the Egyptian underworld, don't piss off the monstrous crocodile that lets Ra by. I don't know, it's your call, but I mean, I guess you're gonna do what you're gonna do. Good luck. The next entity we're going to cover is a Gnostic wind spirit called Abalphe. Again, Teresa Bain points us to the Nag Hammadi codices, specifically an apocalyptic passage called the Paraphrase of Shem. It tells us a demon will come forth from the belly of the serpent. He was hiding in a desolate place. He will perform many wonders. Many will loathe him. A wind will come forth from his mouth with a female likeness. Her name will be called Abalphe. He will reign over the world from the east to the west. So really, this is an entity born of an unnamed demon. I'm not quite sure how to classify that. Is it a demon in its own right? Is it a sub-demon but never human spiritual entity? This codex leaves so many unanswered questions. Now, a deep dive into the Gnostic texts is also beyond the scope of this particular presentation. Most of the information I was able to glean was relating to scriptural metaphors, but that's not exactly my purview. For further information on the metaphorical implications, literary allegory, mythological context, a fellow YouTuber, Myth Conceptions, has an excellent presentation that I'd strongly recommend. Furthermore, because there is so little relevant data available on what this entity actually is or may be, I'm not going to attempt to classify this at all. This is one of those times when the wisest statement anyone can make in any discipline of the sciences is simply, I don't know. If anyone actually encounters this elusive wind entity, please let me know. I'd like to look over any data you've collected from the encounter. I would be intrigued to see any results you could get on both the electromagnetic field spectrum as well as any thermal imagery you could gather. And now, on to the next entity. Well, as you can see, the shop manager has stopped by today. He's definitely making sure that I am at work and doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Anyway, the final entity of today is named Abata. It's Illy's turn to point us in the direction of this entity. We do have a little bit of information about this entity. It's unmentioned by Bane and Guiley, but Judica Illy's Encyclopedia of Spirits points us back to West Africa, where the Yoruban Orisha called Abata, referred to as the Swamp Queen, exists. The Orisha are revered deities in Yoruban mythology, although that term is understood somewhat differently than in Western mythologies. Yoruban deities are generally understood to be intermediaries between the human and divine realms and are pivotal in relaying moral and spiritual guidance to humans. Yes, I'm working. You know I'm working. Tell the boss I'm working. Handsome boy. Anyway, origins. Abata comes from a Yoruban tradition that shows her as the female compatriot of a fellow Orisha, Erinli. Interestingly enough, there are references to Abata that are nearly identical in both Yoruban and Cuban mythologies. As my understanding as an anthropologist is admittedly amateurist at best, all I really get from that is, neat, same entity in two different locations in the world. I'm sure there's a complex immigration reason involved, but that doesn't really give me any more information as to what this entity actually is, so I'm relatively unconcerned. Yes, I'm working. Make sure you tell the boss I'm hard at work here, all right? Anyway, that being said, from my understanding of the entity, Abata is more commonly understood to be the female in Yoruban traditions, while in Cuban traditions, Abatan is understood to be male. As far as we can go with identification, the best I can come up with is that Abata may manifest in human or in snake form, for whatever that's worth. Abata's domain is mainly swamps and marshes, representing kind of a doorway between worlds. Swamps and marshes are generally considered to represent secrets and hidden treasure, so it logically follows that Abata is less well known than Erinli, and most of the information is, likewise, hidden. As for the folklore behind the entity, Abata is said to be linked with wealth, or the lack thereof, and sometimes to abundance, health, prosperity, and fertility, as well as the nurturing aspects of nature. For interaction, there is some reference to offerings and petitions being brought to Abata's home in the swamp, but specifics are virtually non-existent. Something tells me that a six-pack and a pizza aren't exactly appropriate, but that's just this scientist's hunch. I'm not sure how to really interact with this entity, but I'm sure respect wouldn't hurt. Anyway, yeah, that's all I've got on this entity. Anyway, that's about all the information I was able to dig up about these obscure, little-known entities. I hope you found it informative, and I wanted to thank you for sticking around. Again, if you have any leads I've missed, please feel free to point me in a direction in the comments section down below. It would help me with my research project, and to get my boss off my back, which I would deeply appreciate. As always, like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff. Till next time, fellas, I'll see you down here at the lab.